Finally, we had the second round of negotiations between Iran and the United States over the issues mentioned in the MOU, the document they have signed, Donald Trump
Yes.
in the United States and Iranian President Pezeshkian. And when it comes to the basic, to the main problems between the two sides is the case of Lebanon, which was extensively negotiated and discussed in the meeting in they had. And looking at this way that JD Vance, looking at the way that JD Vance is somehow reshaping the foreign policy, maybe because many people are so much pessimist about what's going on in Washington. They don't want to trust if there is a new mood, then there is a new move and mood in Washington to change the course vis-a-vis the West Asia. But something particularly when it comes to Lebanon is happening. And here is what JD Vance said in response to the discussion he had with the Iranian side.
Expect the Iranians to make Lebanon as much of a linchpin as they ended up doing? And how would you describe the progress on Lebanon? I know Mr. Araghchi said it was very good progress, but what's your characterization of it?
Yeah, I would describe it as very good progress too. I mean, look, we want a regional ceasefire, right? We want Hezbollah to stop firing at our friends in Israel. We want Israelis to be able to live in peace. We also want to make sure that, when things happen, they don't spiral into a broader escalation. And so we've been, I think, very good at setting up what we're calling a deconfliction mechanism. But what it really is to say that when things happen, the sides are actually talking to one another. Sometimes, you've got a bit of a chicken and egg problem, that you've got a junior guy who fires a drone that didn't have approval from the high command. Okay, of course, Israel has to respond to that. But then sometimes that response, we could actually have a better and more peaceful situation if Israel responds in the context of a conversation that's ongoing between Hezbollah, Lebanon, Israel, and other partners in the region. There really hasn't been a mechanism to have those discussions until basically around 4 p.m. yesterday, Bergenstock time, when we set that up. So what we're trying to do is to say, first of all, Israel and every other nation in the region has the right of self-defense, but we want to make sure that everybody has that right of self-defense in the background where we're talking about how to de-escalate these conflicts rather than spiraling out of control. Sometimes what will happen is that if the conflict spirals out of control, that's worse for everybody's self-defense and worse for everybody's security. So we've actually got the process in place to ensure that that escalation doesn't happen. Now, I will say you already see the fruits of that. Over the past 24 hours have probably been the most peaceful that we've seen the situation in Lebanon. The previous 24 hours were pretty good. Obviously, there was some shooting about 72 hours ago. So this is a work in progress, but what we've done is actually set up the operation so that we can ensure it doesn't spiral out of control.
Just, John, 2 points. Before, just 2 hours ago, 2 hours ago, we had a report coming out of Lebanon saying that there is some sort of firing happening. Israelis attacked the people who were in Ali Taher, fortress, because there was a huge fight between Lebanese Hezbollah and Israelis. So they wanted to evacuate the bodies of those people who were killed in that region. So Israelis fired at them. That's happening right now. But what is important about what JD Vance said, for the first time, they're defining a new mechanism between Iran and the United States. He said that, and this is new. The second point is somehow the United States is recognizing the right of self-defense, not only for Israel, but also for Lebanon, which it means they're recognizing that for Hezbollah. Hezbollah has the right to self-defense. What is your understanding of that? What is your interpretation of that?
Well, I have to say, no, Vance is not recognizing that Hezbollah has a right to self-defense. It recognizes that the Lebanese government, and that's different. But let me put important questions you just raised, and our audience has gotten to hear quite a lot of what Vance has had to say in Switzerland. Let me just make sure that we all understand who he's really talking to. As we've said here before, Vice President Vance is now running very aggressively and urgently to be the successor Republican candidate for president. He must do that, and he must demonstrate visibility that he's in control of the key issues that Republican partisans, both the MAGA constituency that favors Donald Trump and his son for succession, and the Republican Party in general, and the voters lying between the Republicans and Democrats, Vance has to capture them and capture them quickly and be seen to be in control. So he's talking at the US audience. That's important, not at the Iranian audience, not at the rest of the world. Second, it's very important, and we tend to forget it in the podcast space, to see our space as bigger than the US voter space. The fact is that US voters don't care if anyone or everyone dies in the Middle East. When in the most recent rounds of polls, and if you go outside your house or apartment, you ask your friends, very, very few people, American voters, certainly nobody who's keen on the Republican Party, considers the war in the Middle East to be important. It's not an important issue. What are the important issues? First, corruption in politics. The role of money in politics is now a dominant public issue among US voters. We talk about a lot. We'll come back to it because Jared Kushner's presence in Switzerland and what Vance had to say about him is utterly corrupt. Okay, first thing. The second is inflation. Affordability of healthcare, whether if you're risk of dying, you'll die because there's no hospital care. Hospital care, inflation, and the expansion of the federal budget, those are the key issues. More than 2/3 of US voters have those on their minds. So that's what Vance was talking to. That's the important part for his political future, for the Republican Party against the Democrats. He's talking at affordability of healthcare, inflation, the federal budget deficit. Now, President Trump's net disapproval has been ticking upwards as this so-called peace talks seem to be gaining in traction and strength. So what's the reason for that? It's that US voters don't see any impact on what's happening in the Middle East, certainly not in Lebanon, but they do see the connection between the Hormuz Strait and the cost of their gas tank to fill up and the cost of commodities and healthcare. So that's where Vance was talking. The Vance vote is intimately tied first to Trump and second to the price of oil and third to the settlement in the Hormuz. Those are the key issues. In that context, and it's not my judgment, the voters don't care what happens in Lebanon, first. Second, tactically, what Vance has just gone and done is to say, we will settle the Lebanon issue. In fact, we will settle the Hormuz issue. We'll settle Iran's sanctions issues by a series of talking shops. They're called in the papers a deconfliction unit or cell for Lebanon. We'll call it a high-level committee to oversee the development of the MOU points, a technical working group to discuss nuclear issues, a special new review board, which Kushner will dominate, to discuss and control the release of Iranian assets. Okay, now let's bear in mind, we come to it in a minute, that there are factional differences in Tehran, and you can fill me in and our audience on how differently they see these talking shops. Essentially, what's been done in Switzerland is to postpone all settlements to future talks. Now, what exactly did Vance have to say about the Lebanon conflict? First of all, he does not insist and he does not claim there's any agreement on the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Lebanon. So the way he puts things is if some low-level person fires a drone, he means Hezbollah. He doesn't mean that Hezbollah is even part of the Lebanese government, let alone part of its total communal administration throughout the country. He means, the US policy means exactly what the Israelis mean. Hezbollah must be destroyed. However, to the extent that Iran has tied the survival of Hezbollah and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon to a settlement of the Iran-US conflict, which in turn controls the Hormuz Strait, which in turn controls the oil price, which in turn controls Vance's future, all of those things are tied together, you see. So when Vance says we'll have a deconfliction mechanism. He means that the Israelis will continue to occupy southern Lebanon. If there's firing, which they can stage, that's Hezbollah to blame. And in the future, what we'll have to do is have people talking on the telephone, blaming each other. This is not a solution. And what appears to have happened is a very significant cession on the Iranian side to accept the so-called ceasefire and a ceasefire on or halt to all military operations, leaving everybody in place. And that in turn exposes Hezbollah to attacks elsewhere in Lebanon, especially from the Syrian border side. Okay, so I think one should come out of the Swiss talk results with a very hefty dose of domestic political realism. Americans don't care if genocide occurs in the Middle East to the Palestinians, to the Lebanese, or to the Iranians. They care if what happens to them in their pockets first. Second, Vance is talking at them, by the way. He also said he consulted several times during the Swiss talks with the Israelis. He talked more with them than with, that's to say, the Netanyahu government, than with everybody back in the United States. But he knows what he's doing in the United States. So we have to be realistic here, and we have to be aware that Vance thinks the US empire, so to speak, is gaining in the Middle East.